Africa had a written constitution before many European nations. When people talk about the history of constitutionalism, the idea that rulers should be bound by written laws rather than arbitrary power, they typically point to documents like the Magna Carta 1215 in England or the United States Constitution 1787. What is far less known outside specialized scholarly circles is that Africa had its own written constitutional framework long before many European nations formalized theirs. This remarkable document is the Manden Charter, sometimes called the Kurukan Fuga Charter, codified in 1222 Say in the Mali Empire. The Manden Charter was not merely a set of tribal customs preserved through oral tradition. It was a written declaration that articulated human rights, social order, political accountability, and limits on rulers. In doing so, it demonstrates that structured, institutional governance existed in West Africa centuries before many European countries adopted their first formal constitutions. Yet, despite its significance, the Manden Charter remains little known internationally and is rarely taught in general history curricula. Understanding this charter not only enriches our view of African and world history, but also challenges narrow assumptions about the development of governance and human rights. The context: West Africa before the Charter. In the early 13th century, West Africa was undergoing a profound transformation. The region of Manden, roughly corresponding to parts of present-day Mali, Guinea, and Senegal, was home to a confederation of Mandinka clans. These groups shared cultural practices, trade networks, social norms, and political aspirations. Around this time, legendary leaders such as Sundiata Keita were uniting the Mandinka people into what would become the powerful Mali Empire. The rise of the Mali Empire was not merely a story of conquest. It was a story of governance. As disparate clans coalesced, there emerged a need for a coherent system of laws that would hold diverse communities together, regulating social conduct, protecting individual rights, and defining the powers and limitations of leaders. The result was the Manden Charter. Although African societies have rich oral traditions, this is among the earliest examples of a codified charter that was preserved in written form initially through oral recitation, and later transcribed. Its existence pushes back the timeline of constitutional thinking often attributed exclusively to Europe. What was the Manden Charter? The Manden Charter was a social and political constitution agreed upon by the founders of the Mali Empire to govern the new polity. It addressed a range of topics from leadership accountability to personal freedoms, and from rules of war to protections for the vulnerable. While much of the original text has been reconstructed through oral tradition and later transcription, historians agree that the Charter emphasized these core principles. 1. Limits on rulers. The Charter made clear that leaders, whether clan heads or the emperor, were subject to laws and customs. They could not rule arbitrarily. Authority was not absolute, and leaders were accountable to the people and community institutions. 2. Protection of individual rights. The Charter included provisions that ensured the safety, dignity, and property of individuals, especially those in vulnerable positions. 3. Social order and conflict resolution. The Charter outlined systems for adjudicating disputes, maintaining peace between clans, and defining acceptable conduct in times of war. 4. Environmental and communal protections. Some interpretations of the Charter suggest early forms of communal land rights and environmental stewardship. The document called for balanced use of resources and respect for the land, reflecting a governance model in harmony with social and ecological needs. Why the Manden Charter mattered. The significance of the Manden Charter lies not only in what it said, but in what it represented. A conscious effort to craft written governance grounded in principles of justice, accountability, and collective well-being. For the Mali Empire, the most powerful state in West Africa for centuries, it was both a foundation for internal stability and a legitimizing document for imperial authority. 1. It reflected a mature civilizational ethos. There is a tendency to project backwardness onto African societies before European colonization, suggesting they lacked complex governance. The Manden Charter directly contradicts that myth. It shows that West African leaders were not merely concerned with conquest, but with institutionalizing norms that safeguarded society, protected rights, and structured public life. 2. It preceded many European constitutions. To underscore how early this was, consider that the Magna Carta, often heralded as the birth of constitutionalism in Europe, was signed in 1215, only 7 years before the Manden Charter. However, its scope was limited mostly to noble privileges and did not articulate broad human rights. Many European polities did not develop written constitutional documents with clear governance structures until centuries later. The United States Constitution, widely studied as a foundational constitutional document, was adopted in 1787, 565 years after the Manden Charter. Thus, the Manden Charter is an early testament to written constitutional thinking outside Europe, a pioneering model of structured, rights-oriented governance. 3. It legitimized shared authority and social responsibilities. The Charter was not simply a set of rules handed down by a king. Instead, it represented a broad consensus among clans and leaders about how the community would be governed. It bound rulers and citizens alike to a common set of obligations and protections. This emphasis on shared responsibility between leaders and those they governed was an early form of social contract thinking. Why it's rarely taught. Despite its historical weight, the Manden Charter is rarely discussed in mainstream global history curricula. There are several overlapping reasons for this. 1. Eurocentric frameworks in education. Most global history education has long been shaped by European narratives that emphasize Western developments as the primary drivers of institutional progress, without acknowledging parallel or earlier traditions elsewhere. 2. Oral tradition and transcription challenges. Many African societies transmitted knowledge orally. The Manden Charter's earliest iterations were preserved through oral recitation across generations. While oral tradition is a rich and valid medium of historical preservation, Western academic culture has historically privileged written texts. 3. Colonial disruption and historical fragmentation. Colonialism disrupted indigenous social and political institutions across Africa. Colonial authorities often dismissed or dismantled local systems of governance and replaced them with imported models. 4. Limited global dissemination of research. There is growing scholarship on the Manden Charter and other African institutional traditions, but much of this work has remained within specialized academic circles or within African universities. It has only recently begun to gain broader international attention through conferences, publications, and online platforms. Lessons we can draw today. The story of the Manden Charter matters not only for historians, but for anyone interested in governance, human rights, and global civilizational heritage. 1. Written governance is not an exclusively Western invention. The Manden Charter challenges narratives that posit Europe as the singular origin of constitutional and human rights ideas. It shows that diverse civilizations have independently developed structured frameworks to govern societies justly. 2. Societies can articulate rights and limits on power without modern institutions. The Charter was created long before modern bureaucratic states or centralized courts, yet it articulated limitations on rulers, protections for individuals, and systems for social order. 3. Education should reflect global pluralism. Incorporating histories like the Manden Charter into curricula encourages a richer understanding of human political development. It allows students to see constitutionalism as a global achievement, not a uniquely Western innovation. Conclusion. The Manden Charter of 1222 stands as one of Africa's earliest written constitutional documents outlining human rights, social order, and limits on rulers. Understanding the Manden Charter expands our appreciation for the diversity of human institutional creativity. It shows that structured governance, debate about rights and responsibilities, and limits on political power were not confined to one region of the world. Africa's contributions to the history of constitutional thought deserve recognition, and they offer valuable lessons for how communities can bind leaders and citizens alike to shared principles of justice and accountability.